Azorius Omniscience combo is a deck that holds a decent part of the meta in regular play, online, and in tournaments. It's shown up pretty big lately in pretty large amounts outside of, all the Is It Prowess players, but let's talk about how this deck ticks and potentially how to beat it. This deck's game plan is very basic. Get Omni in the graveyard, use Abuelo's Awakening to reanimate it, and do some form of infinite combo to win the game. Previously, the combos that this deck used involved looping Invasion of Arcavios, and This Town Ain't Big Enough to repeatedly cast either Haunt the Network or Heroic Reinforcements from your sideboard and then graveyard. You'd either drain your opponent out with Haunt the Network or swing for lethal with the tokens from Heroic Reinforcements. Lately, that version of the deck has fallen to the wayside a little bit because there is a new version of it that uses Meringue River Regent and Founding the Third Path to infinitely bounce them back to your hand and use the read ahead function for Founding the Third Path to repeatedly mill out your opponent for 4 cards over and over and over again. That's the version that has been more popular lately and will be the main one that I'm discussing. The other one does still work and does still play. However, if you're playing it in paper, you got to realize that some of your sideboard slots are now being taken up by cards that Invasion of Arcavios is going to fetch, and that is a reason why I think a lot of people have started going away from it and instead using the Founding the Third Path option. The basic gameplay of this deck involves using cards like Moment of Truth, Whirling Dragonstorm, Confounding Riddle, and Coil Catch, the Omen side of Meringue River Regent, and Afara's Dispersal to put cards into your graveyard and Hunt for an Omniscience to put into your graveyard. There are a lot of draw discard cards. There's cards that look at the top 3, one hand, one graveyard, one back in your deck. And the whole idea is that you will use these repeatedly throughout the game as ways to just try and find that Omniscience and put it into the graveyard so you can use Abuelo's Awakening. It's very straightforward, but learning when to use those cards and which ones to use in what situation will often mean the difference between winning and losing. Now, while that draw discard is very good, it is not true card advantage that is reserved for Stock Up. Stock Up looks at the top 5 and you get to pick 2. It's one of the best card draw spells in Standard right now. It is unbelievably powerful. It's so great to play on curve and later in the game. It's just great. This deck does also sometimes run Thundertrap Trainer, though that's a bit of an oddity. It is not the normal card you see, but it is a good card that has seen play in a decent amount of decks, so I felt the need to mention it. This deck doesn't run too many interaction spells, 2 Spell Pierce, 4 Afara's Dispersal, 4 Temporary Lockdown. They're not really there to control the game, they are there to slow down the aggro decks and let you win the game on turn 4. Spell Pieces are there to protect the combo, the Afara's Dispersal and Temp Lockdowns are there to protect your life total. They are very important cards in the deck, and they are cards that you should definitely be mainboarding. However, I will say that this deck is light on interaction, and you need to be very smart and efficient with your removal. Unlike a lot of other decks in Standard, this deck's mana base actually kind of matters. It has 3 specific lands that are pretty important to the deck, one being Cavern of Souls to make your Meringue River Regent uncounterable if you so need, Mistridge's Village to enable the next spell you cast to be uncounterable, really good against the control decks, and then Blast Zone, which is technically another way to help fight off those aggro decks. A lot of them run a lot of 1-drops that are problematic and a lot of 2-drops that are problematic, so either playing Blast Zone and then blowing it up, or playing it, leveling it up, and then blowing it up can be a really good way to have just that tiny bit of extra interaction that also lets you hold up your mana for your other spells. Usually sideboarding with a deck like this is simple. You have stuff to counter the person playing counter spells, you have stuff to deal with the creature threats, and you have stuff to disrupt the combo decks. On average, that results with stuff like Change the Equation, Get Lost, Cathar Commando, Ghost Vacuum, Negate, Disdainful Stroke, those types of cards. However, due to this deck's nature as a combo deck, there is often threats in the sideboard as well, or things that threaten to disrupt how your opponent wants to interact with you. Cards like Voice of Victory and Clarion Conquer will shut down interaction on your turn, and artifacts, while Beza and Overlord of the Mistmoors will often help against the aggro matchups, either gaining your life and making bodies, or just making bodies and being a big body. Some decks are also running Riptide Gearhulk at the moment, which is a card that'll tuck away a creature and then leave behind a 2/2 double striker with prowess, which can honestly just end games on its own. The deck does function as a combo deck that can slot in these sideboard threats in order to help it against other decks, but there's an argument to be made that if your opponent runs Graveyard Hate mainboarded in the first place, and you know they're going to have extra Graveyard Hate in the sideboard, you can argue to simply swap out the entire Omniscience of Abuelo's Awakening combo, take those 8 cards out of the deck, and then slot in Voice of Victory, Beza, Overlord, and Riptide Gearhulk, and just change your game plan entirely, and just go from being a tempo combo deck to being a tempo control deck, running these big threats to try and end the game. Do I recommend this? No. This is a panic game 3 situation where you won the first one off the combo, but it was tight. The second game, you just got hard shut down out of the graveyard. In the third game, you go, all right, something's gotta change. It is an option that this deck has, but it is not its strongest feature. Playing against this deck, in theory, is very straightforward. Game 1, you realize what's happening, and you just try and bum rush them down and kill them as fast as possible. Disrupt their combo as best you can, and just try and win through the beatdown, usually. In the second game, you bring in all the graveyard hate your deck has to fight against them. Aggro and mid-range players, you want to slot in lots of threats, but make sure that you're keeping hands that'll end games quickly. The Omni deck does have enough interaction, especially in games 2 and 3, so you just have to make sure that you're playing around it. Control decks, make sure that you are indeed slotting in all the graveyard hate you can possibly muster, and make sure that you are ready to deal with stuff like Clarion Conqueror and Riptide Gear Hulk. Now, there's a lot of anti-graveyard cards in Standard right now, so I'm just going to list and show off quite a few of the ones that I think are worth a squeeze, and are things you should consider. Stuff like Ghost Vacuum, Rest in Peace, Keen-Eyed Curator, Agatha's Soul Cauldron, Scavenging Ooze, Soul Guide Lantern, Cease and Desist, and Heritage Reclamation. There are so many of them to play, but a lot of the ones that I just listed and are being shown to you on screen now are ones that typically fit into other archetypes of decks or are just good general cards that do multiple things and can be slotted in very simply. In terms of playing against this deck, something to remember is that often when Abuela's Awakening reanimates the Omniscience, it comes back as a 1/1. That is really easy to remove for most aggro decks and most mid-range decks, and control decks won't have a hard time either. So push the tower, Burst Lightning, Cut Down, all of them will kill off an Omniscience instantly. If you're playing the deck, something to keep in mind is that you may just want to have an extra Omniscience in hands. Odds are that on the turn 4 or 5 where you're trying to reanimate it, they won't have the mana to both play out their turn aggressively that they want to do in order to keep you down, and also hold open the mana to deal with 2 Omniscience. So having a spare is always a good option. Note for the people playing against that, counterspells. Counterspells and enchantment hate. Unfortunately, there is very little else to be said for them having the second Omniscience. It is just a way of things. Thank you so much for hanging out. If you made it to the end of this video here, you're wonderful. Please like, comment, and subscribe. I'm trying to make a point of putting together these long, thought-out videos about the meta decks of the moment. I try my best to learn how to play them ahead of time, but if you feel like you have something to add, something that'll be extra good information, or ways that you want to correct a misconception that I had, please feel free to leave it in the comment. All I ask is that you be respectful about it all. This deck is very, very good, but it does have some very glaring weaknesses that'll make it often lose in matchups where it seems like it should be favored. But it's a really great deck, and if you're wanting to play Standard, either online or in paper, in any way, shape, or form, really, this deck's good. It's great. It's very powerful, and it'll often win games before people know what's happening. Either way, thank you for hanging out and watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to catch you in the next one.